Good afternoon and very welcome to the Swedish Institute for Classical Studies at Rome. My name is Sabrina Nolander and I'm the Deputy Director of the Institute. It's a great pleasure for me today to introduce our Gill Fellow of this academic year, Meghan Quinlan, who is going to speak about her research here in Rome. Meghan Quinlan is trained as a musician, musicologist and medievalist, holding a Doctor of Philosophy degree in medieval musicology from the University of Oxford. Her work in Rome focuses on the musical or sonic aspects of dream interpretation in medieval dream books, some of which are held at the Vatican Library. She's interested in how punning, mistranslation, and other continuities of sound inform the dream interpretations of these traditions and how they relate to the ontologies of music and grammar contemporary with them. And today you're going to speak on the topic, Dreams, Time and History, a dialogue between psychoanalysis and 12th century dream theory via Michel de Certeau. Bienvenue.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you all for being here. The talk I've prepared today is based on one of the projects I've been working on in Rome. It's a slightly different one from this Puns in Dream project that Sabrina described for you. And this aspect of the project combines conceptual history with the philosophy of history. In it, I propose dreaming as a model for doing history. And I'll develop in detail exactly what I mean by dreaming throughout this talk. But first, I'd like to give you some idea of the context in which the idea arose. So a few years ago, I organized a conference on premodern dreams at Uppsala University. And we invited medievalist literary scholars, musicologists, art historians, and a few psychoanalysts. And we had a really great, fruitful dialogue. Though, as is often the case when people from different disciplines meet, there were a few misunderstandings. Some of the medievalists assumed certain things about psychoanalysis based on its cultural reception. And on the other hand, some of the psychoanalysts tried to interpret the conference's historical material using psychoanalytic concepts, but without really registering the material's context and singularity. As someone trained in history myself, but with a long-standing interest in psychoanalysis, this made me wonder, how might a dialogue be built between history and psychoanalysis in which neither discourse ends up colonizing the other, where historians take seriously the insights on time, memory, and desire that psychoanalysis has honed through its many encounters with living patients, and where psychoanalysts allow this strange singularity of historical phenomena to poke holes in their concepts, preventing the dead from being assimilated into intellectual cliches. To think about this question, I took as my starting point the thought of the Jesuit polymath, Michel de Certeau. Certeau is known in the Anglophone world for his theories of space and place. But as both a practicing historian of early modernism and a founding member, along with Jacques Lacan, of the École Freudian in Paris, his historiographical work is also extremely valuable in that it inhabits this rift between history and psychoanalysis. The image of the historian that Certeau builds up in works like Heterologies and The Writing of History is a bit like that of a good analyst in the clinic. He or she embraces with drifting receptivity the singularities of the past, rather than assimilating them immediately and wholesale into pre-existing interpretive structures. But unlike some post-structural thinkers, Certeau also does not reduce history to representation. And this is where dreams come in. In his writing, Certeau suggests again and again that history speaks most directly in the strangeness of its dead others. A strangeness that we intuit differently, of course, from person to person, body to body that can excite, interest, or scare the historian as it draws them toward the material. A strangeness that often elicits a desire to try to understand and capture the past in language, but which is never quite contained by it, because there will always be things from the past that our own time has made unthinkable, but which may emerge in the thought of some later time. In a few places in his writings, Certeau compares this strangeness in passing, to dreams. He writes, for instance, that in historical discourse, the voices of the past are fragmented and patched together, keeping nothing of their own, yet still capable, as in a dream, of bringing forth something uncanny. And this, for Certeau, is, quote, the surreptitious and altering power of the repressed, unquote. And we can understand the word repressed here as meaning whatever has become unthinkable because it's too threatening to the thinker's coherence, whatever is only accessible in affects or symptoms that return again and again within a culture or a person. There are two things that I want to draw out from Certeau's brief comparison of history to dreaming. The first is the idea of the historical source, whether primary or secondary, as a hodgepodge of fragments from different times. And this might be obvious to the archaeologists and codicologists among you. But it's worth noting that Certeau stresses not only history's mixture of past times, but also our present desires and future aims. Dreams, I suggest, combine fragments from the distant and recent past in similar ways. The second thing, related to the first, is an analogy between history's encounters with those dead others whose voices have been reworked or reassembled in the process of historical writing, and the dream's encounters with the other in the self, which the dream work tames through an associative gloss or metaphor and metonymy, so as not to disturb the dreamer into wakefulness, and which are further reworked when the dream is written down. These two observations are psychoanalytic in their approach to time, memory, and repression. But if I were to perform them, to really try to put us in contact with the strangeness of the past, that would mean, paradoxically, taking a step back from psychoanalytic discourse for a moment, setting aside this conceptual framework, and opening up the idea of the dream historically, where dreaming as time travel and desire take many forms, of which this psychoanalytic configuration is but one iteration. And that's what I'm going to do. Giving neither psychoanalysis nor historiography the full benefit of a privileged position, my notion of the dream will occupy, with Certeau, the rift between both disciplines, and we'll see what we can make of this dialogue. Before moving into the more distant past, though, I want first to spend a few minutes with Freud, whose interpretation of dreams begins with the following epigraph. Flectere si nequeo superos, acaranta movebo. Is there anyone among you who recognizes this? Probably if I show you, so the English, if I cannot bend the gods above, I will rouse the underworld. So this is from Virgil's Aeneid. This is what Juno says. It's the goddess Juno, when she learns that Jupiter has let the Trojan Aeneas marry Lavinia and become king of Latium and founder of Rome. And since Juno has several reasons to hate the Trojans, this is something she's been trying to prevent, but she knows that she can't because it's been prophesied. She can only use the weapons of detour and delay, or as Juno puts it in translation, the Trojans are in Tiber and abide within their prayed-for land delectable, safe from the seas and me. If so weak my own prerogative of Godhead be, let me seek strength in war, come whence it will. If heaven I may not move, on hell I call. To bar him from his Latin throne exceeds my fated power. So be it. Fate has given Lavinia for his bride. But long delays I still can plot, and to the high event deferment and obstruction. I can smite the subjects of both kings. Let sire and son buy with their people's blood this marriage bond. Much has been made of Freud's identification with Juno here, and what he may have seen as a lone rebellion through his dream book's scandalous revelation of an underside of the human mind against a well-to-do and increasingly anti-Semitic Vienna. More relevant for our purposes are the connections Freud seems to draw between Juno's detours and delays and the function of dreams themselves. In Freud's theory, dreams originate in desires or wishes that have been warded off by social taboos or experiences that precede the dreamer's development of language. The mind cannot get what it wants, so it hallucinates it, as when a baby sucks their thumb through a fantasy of drinking milk. But the social pressure against certain desires leads to their transformation in dreams, according to the associative psychic structures that surround these desires, which are accumulated in the dreamer over many years. These transformations, expressed through a palette of thoughts and perceptions from the dreamer's past few days of waking life, are fashioned into a hallucinatory world, the dream work. The conflict between what the dreamer wants and what they cannot have leads, as it does with Juno, to detours and delays. Desire for Freud is constantly being transformed under pressure into new forms of expression, delayed, looped, frozen, and substituted. In psychoanalysis, these pathways through time are known as vicissitudes, and dreams are their most direct markers, giving us the sensory or symbolic relics of everything that the mind cannot think and thus must transform or disguise. And this is why, at the end of the interpretation of dreams, Freud repeats Juno's words before one of his most famous statements, saying again, "Flectere si nequeo superos acaranta movebo." The interpretation of dreams is the via regia to a knowledge of the unconscious in psychic life. Freud is not the first to cite the Aeneid in the context of dreams. Book 6, Aeneas' descent into the underworld, with its statements on the nature of dreams and the twin gates of sleep, horn and ivory, is cited in Macrobius's commentary on Cicero's Dream of Scipio, a central and frequently glossed text on dreams in the Middle Ages. It's also discussed in the dream theories of various philosophers and church fathers, and imitated in medieval dream literature, most famously by Dante. And here you can just see a couple examples from the Vatican Library. While dreams, in Freud's and Certeau's perspective, blend past, present, and future by assembling and transforming memory fragments to fulfill the dreamer's desires, many of these premodern texts blend past, present, and future as forms of divination, fulfilling not desires, but future events. The twin gates of sleep, for instance, horn and ivory, which appear in dream writings from Homer through the Middle Ages into early modernity, are future-oriented. Named by Homer's Penelope to distinguish between dreams that fulfill the future and those that do not. Horn, the more transparent substance, is a pun on fulfill, and ivory, being more opaque, is a pun on deceive. In Aeneas' journey to the underworld, he likewise confronts figures from his own past, his former lover, Dido, his father, Anchises, yet travels with an authority on the future, the Cumaean Sibyl, exiting mysteriously through the ivory gate. In medieval theoretical tracts and the dream key manuals spread across pre-modern Eurasia, too, dreams are valued for the access they give to the future and categorized according to their epistemological reliability in this respect. The third book of Macrobius's commentary, one of the most widely copied dream texts, groups dreams into 5 categories. And there you already see it. The oraculum, which is where you have a dream where a trustworthy authority figure tells you the future, they foretell the future. The second is the visio, and this is when future events are seen firsthand by the dreamer. Then there's the somnium, whose truth is shrouded in symbolic imagery, so this is a symbolic dream. The fourth is the phantasma, and this is where the dreamer sees images in the interval between sleeping and waking. And the fifth, which is of the lowest value, is the insomnium, which includes nightmares and other confused dreams. In Macrobius's model, the last 2 categories of dream lack prophetic significance because their sources are purely physiological or psychological, and they exist only temporarily, afterwards having no use or meaning. So the bottom 2 are not prophetic. They're not used in prognostication because they come from the body. Macrobius does not explain why the first 3 types of dreams offer access to the future, but he does associate them with a divine encounter, and he does this through an allusion, again, to the Aeneid. Macrobius writes, Porphyry, who's a Neoplatonic philosopher, Porphyry makes the following remarks on a passage in Homer. All truth is hidden. Nevertheless, the soul, when it is partially disengaged from the bodily functions during sleep, at times gazes and at times peers intently at the truth, but does not apprehend it. And when it gazes, it does not see with clear and direct vision, but rather with a dark, obstructing veil interposed. And this is where Macrobius cites the Aeneid. He says, Virgil attests that this is natural in the following lines. Behold, for all the cloud which now drawn over thy sight dulls thy mortal vision, and with dank pall enshrouds thee, I will tear away. And these words from the Aeneid in blue belong to Venus, Aeneas' mother, when among the ruins of Troy, she gives her divine counsel to Aeneas, preventing him from taking revenge on Helen. And this divine counsel involves removing from him the cloud that dulls his mortal vision. The implication, at least for Neoplatonist writers like Macrobius and later medieval commentators, is that it is Aeneas' mortality, his lack of insight over vast tracts of time, that obstructs his judgment. And moreover, that dreams can, with the help of the gods, temporarily undo the clouding effects of embodiment, opening up the dreamer's temporal vistas. Macrobius does not claim this directly, but the 12th century philosophers of the so-called School of Chartres do. William of Saint-Thierry, for instance, writes in his De Natura Corporis et Anime, but the soul, having shut out all the exterior works of the senses, reflects upon past, present, and future, and these are dreams. I want to focus, though, on William of Saint-Thierry's contemporary, the 12th century philosopher William of Conches, because the latter builds his theory of dreams directly on Macrobius's text as a gloss, the Glossae super Macrobium, which you see there, and which which is in the Vatican. So William's gloss it's still untranslated and it's only partially edited. So I've been working on it with the help of my Latinist husband, Gustav Samor. And there is a partial edition by Thomas Rücklin. But the manuscript that you see here is one of the most complete and reliable. You might notice it's a bit hard to see from where you are, I think. But if you really strain your eyes, you might see that certain words are underlined. Those are Macrobius's words, and then the rest of the text is William's gloss. On Macrobius's first 3 types of dreams, William explains that they involve something of divination because they come from the Creator who, quote, knows all things and foretells the future. But this knowledge is imperfectly transmitted to humans because of what Macrobius calls the cloud of sleep, somni nebula, which is an effect of human embodiment. We've already seen this cloud in Macrobius, taken from the Aeneid, but William glosses this cloud as a literal aspect of embodiment, a physical mist produced during digestion called the fumus, which travels from the stomach through the nerves to the brain and obscures the truth of the images seen in dreams. Taking the Sibyl's cavern or domus in the Aeneid as the human body of the sleeping dreamer, William notes how previous glossators have compared the gates of horn and ivory to the dreamer's eyes and mouth. Horn or cornu, true dreams, cornea, he connects with the eyes through a Latin pun, this time on cornea. And ivory, false dreams, he connects with the teeth, since, quote, true dreams can be subject to vision. Oh, there you go. Since true dreams can be subject to vision, whereas the false dreams of ivory can be spoken of and not exposed to the eyes. This more traditional comparison of horn and ivory to the eyes and mouth coexists here with William's own notion of horn and ivory as representing the fumus's various levels of transparency. He writes, and this is going to be a multi-slide quote, so prepared yourselves. What then did Virgil, unlearned in no discipline, wish to understand when he said that in the house of sleep there are 2 gates, and that through one, that is, that of ivory, false dreams come out? Because it is the nature of ivory that however thin it is impermeable to sight. But through the gate of horn true dreams come, because polished horn can be penetrated by sight. This was Virgil's understanding under such an integument, because he called the human body the house of dreams, because just as something is contained in the house, so dreams are contained in the human body. For the body is the reason why there are dreams, somnia. To this house it is said that there are 2 gates, for it happens when out of an excess of food or food of a certain kind, a certain thick fume is formed around the stomach, which rises to the heart and hinders it to such an extent that it cannot move freely. From there, however, it arises and arrives at the brain, which is the seat of the powers of the soul, and it fills the brain with its excessive thickness. Therefore, the inner spirit, directing its sight to consider something, cannot consider it perfectly because it is deceived by this fume, which in its thickness is compared to ivory. Wherefore this thickness is rightly called the gate of ivory. But then he continues, sometimes a certain fine and most thin fume is formed, which by clarifying before it arrives at the brain is made so fine that it can no more be called a fume. Therefore, the soul is unhindered and considers the truth freely, wherefore this fume is called the gate of horn, because of its thinness. So basically, he's associating different levels of opaqueness of this smoke created in the stomach with the gates of horn and ivory. William's interpretation of Virgil's house of sleep with its twin gates as the human body with its internal misty processes is worth noting. And this is because, as William says, the body is the reason why there is a somnium, that is, why the symbolic dream exists. Since normal bodily processes like digestion get in the way of seeing truth, and here he's being quite technical about the term somnium, where truth does not arrive directly as from an oracle. But is only wrapped in an integument. In other words, the body is the reason why truth is obscured in mist. For William, this conceptual link between mist and flesh is ethically meaningful. Just as a misty vapor veils the dreamer's view of the future, so does the flesh veil the soul, miring it in the needs of the moment. Both images, mist and flesh, are shown as prompting a form of temporal narrowness, a limiting of one's capacity to move in time. Dreams allow the dreamer to recover this lost temporal knowledge, though imperfectly. We see this in William's gloss of the fragment of Macrobius that I read earlier, where Macrobius quotes Porphyry. So Macrobius says, Porphyry says, all truth is hidden, and then William comments, for the soul, placed in a star equal to it, had full knowledge of things past, future, and present, but descending toward the body, and having taken on the skin of the body, forgot them to a great degree. It therefore sometimes wishes to investigate the truth, yet it does not see it directly, but obliquely. Hidden, as if in some deep, because of the mist in which the soul has surrounded itself from union with the body. So, dreaming establishes the physiological conditions for the soul to strive for its lost knowledge of things past, future, and present in William's theory here. William depicts this lost knowledge as a fall from stars, a brief reference to the Platonic descent of the soul through successive stages to its embodied earthly abode, since it's attracted by the harmonious construction of the human body. And this passage echoes a comment in Macrobius, descending they all drink of oblivion, some more, some less. For William, the nature of this history is mythological. In his Glossae Super Platonum, William finds in Plato's cosmology what he calls the most profound philosophy veiled by the integument of words. William glosses the image of the star as a symbol for the planetary resources provided through nature for each embodied soul. The stars and lesser gods are reframed into a mediated theory of creation, one in which nature does not materialize all at once, but develops according to its own internal laws. But even the Timaeus itself, in the translation available to William by Chalcidius, underscores the impossibility of a perfect, literal account of creation. Human accounts are but an image of divine wisdom, yet they are nevertheless all we have. For William, the lived world is the image of that other archetypal world, just as time is the image of eternity. And this image is not merely illustration by way of a parallel, but the very fabric of the cosmos. Returning for a moment to Michel de Certeau, we could say the following. While Certeau formulates the past as resembling dreams, While Certeau formulates the past as resembling dreams, William formulates dreams as resembling the past, a lost collective past that transmits knowledge of the future. And this past is also so strange in its perfection that it can only be depicted by fable or integument. The degree of optimism shown for the dream's ability to recuperate this lost state varies from source to source. In another manuscript version of William's gloss on Macrobius, the one I showed you from the Vatican, the text is more hopeful. It reads, "And note that Porphyry wanted to understand that God gave three things to the soul: indissolubility in essence, perfection in wisdom, and freedom of will. Of these three, it retained one, that is, indissolubility in essence, but it lost two by the weight of the flesh to which it was joined." I feel that we're having a duet. However, says William, the soul is constantly working in the search for truth, because you can drive out nature with a pitchfork, but it will always come back. Yet while a person is awake, the soul is so absorbed in the activities of his body that it can spare little time for contemplation. But when they sleep, the soul is not impeded by the exercise of the senses. It exercises reason and understanding more freely and searches for truth. But it often fails for the above reasons. Hence, Porphyry says, all truth is hidden. That is because of the mist that the soul attracts from its union with the body. And yet, the truth can well be known by someone who is free in mind. So this long reading emphasizes the soul's continued pursuit of truth and the glimpsing of it in dreams, especially for those who are, quote, free in mind. This linking of the dreamer's spiritual state with the quality of their dreams introduces the ethical aspect of William's theory. The only way of transcending humanity's loss of temporal consciousness and its veiling of dreams is to train the soul to resist the vices and the trouble that embodiment affords. William expresses this toward the end of his text by glossing, again, the Aeneid, where Venus promises to remove the cloud that dulls Aeneas's mortal vision. And this is the last quote of William. So he says, on the authority of Virgil, Macrobius proves that the nature of the flesh confers a certain mist on the soul. Note that in these verses, Venus shows her son Aeneas the destruction of Troy, ripping away the cloud from his eyes. That is, the mist brought upon him by the flesh. Here, Venus removes all cloud and obscurity from Aeneas, so that, the cloud being removed, he can see the destruction of Troy. For the burden of the flesh does not oppress the soul of the wise man, because the wise man removes from himself all the vices of the flesh. Expanding the soul's temporal consciousness is an ethical act, one for which dreaming is both a gauge and a model. Dreams from God increase the soul's temporal mobility for William, and a virtuous soul can navigate this expansive state more deftly because it has trained itself to transcend each embodied moment and its impulses, desiring instead a lost, but never in this life fully recuperable, knowledge of all time. So, what do William of Conches and Freud have to say to each other? I really wish I could just invite them to a dinner party and find out, since I can't speak for them. I just have these recontextualized fragments of their voices. But one icebreaker might be the question of how they deal with the incomprehensible. Both speak in very different ways about forms of substitution according to the logic of integument or allegory or metaphor for a quasi-mythical past that can't be understood or can't be fathomed by human beings. In Freud's case, this is the individual's distant past, and in William's, it's a shared Platonic myth. Both see the dream as participating in the work of trying to fathom this past while respecting their barriers to understanding. Certeau's dream-like notion of history is likewise cautiously optimistic about what the strangeness of history can convey through its displacements. It suggests that history can do more than mourn what has been lost through its substitutions, because repression is not just a mode of metaphorical or metonymic transformation, but also of preservation. The other of a dreamlike past, psychoanalytically configured, is present as well as absent. Even when glossed over by new explanations, it rebites, il remord, as Certeau says. It inhabits, quote, zones of silence, of sorcery, madness, festival, popular literature, the forgotten world of the peasant, through which the historian can prowl on the margins, loosening the grip of a society gifted at generalization, end quote. William and his 12th century contemporaries have much to reveal about glosses that preserve what they replace. Foregrounding on the manuscript page by rubrication, mise en page, or lines of emphasis, the ancient textual artifacts that they interpret, they make physically explicit one discourse's transformation into the other. In this case, from Virgil and Cicero to Macrobius to William. William's commentary embraces its own positionality graphically, even when it may not do so intellectually, and it marks out its imperfect relation to that strange, lost archetypal world, whose attempts at comprehension through image, fable, dream, or unraveled integument are not simply illustrations by way of a parallel, but expressions of a cosmos whose very materiality is isomorphically defined. In making this comparison between 12th century philosophy and psychoanalysis, I don't want to gloss over the important differences between them, which have been reinforced by many virtual cuts of periodization, where time is pushed away and made other. But I think the act of setting one more familiar discourse in dialogue with another more distant one makes more obvious what historians do all the time, exercising the analytic tools of their own time to bridge some gap with the unknown. Certeau sees the Freudian case study as introducing into historical writing what he calls an element of fiction, and he means this not as untruth, but in a very precise sense, as a text that declares the situated nature of the reality that it conveys. Psychoanalysis permits, in fact, demands, that the analyst observe this ever-shifting positionality, marking their own effective, imaginary, and symbolic place in relation to the patient. This work of making and marking relations, of cutting and suturing, is imaginary work with real clinical effects, part of psychoanalysis' constant observed participation in the enmeshment of fantasy and reality that testifies, like William and his contemporaries, to the epistemological value of analogical thinking. The stakes of the historian's craft lie similarly, perhaps, in constantly reassessing their relation to the past as more of their own position is revealed, declaring ceaselessly anew how different times merge and diverge in dreamlike mixtures. Without continuous reworking of its interpretation, the dream, like history, stagnates, becoming itself a cut-off artifact with the capacity to distort living discourse with ideological cliches. The question then arises as to what, in this multi-temporal presentation, this encounter with strangeness, I have glossed over or left out among my own historical objects. And the answer is possibly infinite, as it must include, by Certeau's reckoning, not only the omissions necessary for giving my paper form, but also those aspects of the past whose strangeness challenges our worldview to such a degree that we can't fathom them. The notion that dreams can foretell the future, for instance, might, after half a century's scientific treatment of them as neurological noise, be difficult for modern academics to embrace. And this idea was not universally accepted by pre-modern theorists either, let alone by Freud, who tamed it by attributing it to the dream interpreter's receptivity toward the dreamer's desire. The close relationship between desire and time, between a wish and its fulfillment, is present in broader ways in both the medieval and psychoanalytic theories of dreaming explored here. In William of Conches' desire for time travel within the limits of a perishable, desiring body, or Freud's use of dreams' extended temporalities to decode the dreamer's desire. Dream divination itself, Freud's assimilation of it to his principle of wish fulfillment, and the more recent foreclosures of dreams' phenomenal meaning in favor of culture-specific computer metaphors, processing, optimizing, that serve evolutionary ends, can all be seen as attempts to move forward, to collect and shape the detritus of the past in order to serve the present and the future. They evoke a wider and sometimes brutal impulse to leave the past behind, to catalog it once and for all and move on. Against this impulse, the counterbalancing value of historiography and psychoanalysis is clear. Both create space for those voices inside and outside the self that time has made strange. Thank you.